Howdy, Hoodettes. Welcome inside Black and Gold. Steve Geller, Jeff Nowak, bringing you our post-mini camp edition. The last 3 days have been fun out at Saints Camp. And, man, that last day, Jeff, from morning till the end of practice, there was just constant news cycle flowing in.
Drama.
You could say that.
Drama. It was kind of, it was funny because the first 2 days of minicamp, I'm glad I debated doing an episode on after Wednesday's practice, like a live episode, but I'm glad I didn't, because if I did, I would have been like, oh, Alvin looks so bought in, and Juwan, he hasn't been there, but it'll be fine. And then that all went to shit. And I think that's just a good example of how quickly things can change in news cycles. And
yes,
we're gonna talk a lot about that. But yeah, the drama really cranked up on Thursday. We had, I don't know what you can't call it a holdout. I do wonder if you're going to end up with a fine for Alvin, because
I would think so.
He left practice on Thursday after the walkthrough, did not talk to his head coach about it. And that's what made the situation so interesting when you kind of got it. It was like, hey, what was the deal with Alvin? I don't know. I haven't talked to him. That's what Dennis Allen said.
It's so odd, too, that he comes in for the walkthrough and then takes off.
It's not a good bite. Well, it's like he went there just enough to make sure everyone knew he was there, and then was not. And it came out that it's about a contract. His agent confirmed that. So we're going to talk a lot about that in this segment. We're going to talk a lot about what happened at minicamp as well. But this first segment, we're going to talk about, okay, so I have 3 bad newses and 2 good newses. The first good news is that there's only 2 bad newses.
Hey.
Yeah. So we'll get into that. It's going to be talk about Juwan Johnson. We're going to talk about Chase Young, and we're going to talk about Alvin Kamara. So big names. We're going to talk about Marshawn, but that's going to be in the second segment, which we're going to kind of go through our notes from the entirety of the minicamp. What stood out. Where did this offense and this defense seem to thrive? Where do we see some more work needed? Who struggled? That sort of thing. Then the final segment, we're going to dive into, okay, what are our biggest questions remaining as we kind of hit the break between, minicamp and training camp, which the next time we see this team will be out in California. So it's going to be a lot that happens between now and then, at least in terms of the news cycle, not in terms of player practices. So first things first, a position on this team that I wouldn't have qualified as particularly deep going in suddenly becomes very concerning, and that's tight end with Juwan Johnson. We talked to Dennis Allen about the injury. He's dealing with a foot injury. The way he kind of framed it was, okay, we can't point to any specific time where Juwan hurt his foot. It just kind of developed over time. I tweeted that, and everyone's like, well, what does that mean? I mean, that's not that uncommon. These guys play through kind of aches and pains all the time. It sounds like something to do with a stress fracture or anything like that. Like you don't want to assume, but when you're dealing with injuries that kind of crop up over time, a lot of times it's that type of injury, a ligament that you want to make sure you clean up. And it's usually good that they catch it prior to, okay, well, you continue to play through it and it gets worse and worse and worse. But Juwan Johnson is going to have surgery on that foot. He's going to keep him out a good amount of time. We don't know how much time, but I doubt he'll be ready for the start of training camp. So, then you look at the rest of that room and you're talking about Foster Moreau, Dallin Holker, Michael Jacobson, Tommy Hudson, who has not been there. And what are you going to do there? I don't know. It's concerning. And it's
because the free agent market isn't fantastic either.
No, who are you going to go get? They worked out a couple, UFL guys,
right?
But that position has kind of been a black hole. And it's kind of coincided with the Saints struggling on offense when that position is a black hole. When they were playing well on offense, the tight end position was contributing. So that's a concern. And we did see good things from Dallin Holker. Like I think the rookie UDFA has shown himself well, but man, you don't want to have to go in there relying on a UDFA in his rookie season at that position. And I don't know if any of these guys can block other than Foster Moreau. So yeah, it's going to be a thing.
Yeah. And last year, what was he dealing with? A calf injury, right?
Yeah, it was a calf injury. And you do wonder if those two things are related, just in the sense of like, hey, when you're dealing with an injury, sometimes you overcompensate in another part of your body and then you develop injuries down the line. So who knows? We're not going to have a lot of information about that, but it's definitely something that, you know, you were expecting to hear about some kind of injury. You never want to hear like, okay, going to have surgery midway through the offseason. Like a lot of these guys have surgery in the offseason, but you kind of want that to be right after the season when you have the most amount of time possible to recover.
Sure.
You know, because a lot of times you just clean up surgery, stuff like Chase Young, right? Like you're fixing something that you've been playing through so that you're not dealing with it next year. Well, if you wait this late into the offseason, it will probably impact training camp and at least some of your prep time. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Saints bring in a handful of other names at tight end in terms of just filling out that depth chart. And, you know, Jimmy Graham's one of those names where you're like, maybe.
I was going to say, does he have a cell phone with him while he's training for the Arctic Challenge?
Can he take a break from his rowing to play some football? I don't know. I find that highly unlikely, but you never know.
Yeah, I'm not sure where that would stand either. I would definitely think, though, I'd welcome back Jimmy with open arms, obviously, to this team. I felt like, you know, he's pretty productive in the limited action we saw him a year ago. I think it was, 6 catches, 4 touchdowns, and everybody was always complaining, throw it to Jimmy more. And maybe in this Clint Kubiak system, he could take advantage of that more.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, what I will say in terms of Jimmy is like, we didn't hear about him last year really until right before camp. So if they did intend to bring him back, they are still on a schedule where they could do that, and it would not be necessarily a timeline issue. But let's move on. So the one bit of good news in this segment, we're going to talk about Chase Young, who he talked to the media on Tuesday or Wednesday. I can't remember. One of those days.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
he's Wednesday. Sorry.
He is definitely not a soundbite machine. As someone who works for a radio station, that becomes a problem for us because we're trying to come up with like baits that we can play on the air, and he's not giving you any. He is not a talker. He's a talkless play type guy. But he does seem invested. He has been there. I've seen tweets of like people being like, "Oh, Chase Young wasn't there for minicamp. What a surprise!" And it's like, no. I think you're misreading the situation because he was there for minicamp. We just did not see him on the field, which was always the plan as he works back from his neck injury. But he is there. He does seem invested, and that's a good thing. Tom Pelissero put out an update that he met with Dr. Atkins, the renowned neck surgeon, or whatever it is exactly that he does, and got a positive update. So that's a good thing. The ideal scenario is he's there on the field for the first day of training camp. Now, he doesn't have to participate fully on the first day of training camp, but I would hope to see him out there at minimum working off to the side with trainers, as like we saw with Kool-Aid McKinstry, Stanley Morgan this week. And so it sounds like we're on track for that, or at least something close to that.
It was good to finally see Stanley. You mentioned him. It was one of those that's like, where is this guy?
Where is this man? Number 14, he does exist. Kool-Aid as well in the 34. I always find it funny when cornerbacks wear those. It's like to me, that's always going to be a running back number.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. He looks bulkier than some of the other cornerbacks.
Absolutely. Thick dude.
But is that just because it's like Pete Werner looks like a small linebacker, but is it because he's in 20? You know?
No, I think he's got some mass to him in Kool-Aid.
He's definitely a stronger guy, and maybe he's a little bulkier than he will be at the start of camp because he hasn't really been able to. You know, when you deal with foot injuries, fitness becomes a question more so than like Chase Young. He'll be able to run and be in shape long before he gets out on the field just because of the nature of his injury, right? Kool-Aid, the nature of his injury is you can't run because it's a foot injury. So now that he is running, that's a good sign.
Definitely.
Whereas like Chase is more about working his way up to contact as opposed to Kool-Aid, which is more about probably working his way back into shape. So we'll see that as we go.
And that was something that you mentioned with Chase. He talked about, he's like, I'm doing all the film study. I'm in the weight room hitting that. So when I'm ready to get on the field, I'm real ready to go.
Yeah. And he's a bigger guy. So it's, the fitness is a bigger element for him just because, you can balloon pretty quickly at the defensive end position. You can look like a defensive tackle pretty fast if you're not able to do that exercise. Alontae Taylor's also been dealing with an injury. Doesn't sound significant. It's an oblique injury, but he was not out there Wednesday or Thursday. And, I have no issue with that. I think you'll be fine there. Did give some other guys some opportunities to step up. So we'll talk about that when we get there. But all right, let's move into the Alvin Kamara portion of the program. As we talked about, he was there Tuesday, Wednesday. He did show up. Thursday, he went through the walkthrough, then took off, and it came out that he's looking for a new contract. He's in the final year of his 5-year deal that he was signed ahead. I'm sorry. He's in the second to last year, the penultimate year of the 5-year contract he signed ahead of the 2020 season. But you look at that, and I think it's clear to everyone, including Alvin, including his agent, including the Saints, that for all intents and purposes, this is the final year of that contract in terms of commitments. And that's only furthered by the fact that the Saints did not restructure that contract heading into this season. He's now the only player really that has not had their contract touch in terms of like star players or anyone with significant money that you can move forward, because the Saints did restructure Taysom Hill's contract.
Yeah, that was another positive news there.
I mean, I don't know how positive it is until you see what that amounts to. It's going to make life more difficult for them next year. So, and you are now committed to a 34-year-old injury-prone quarterback beyond this year. So it might not be a positive thing. We don't know. We'll have to see how it works. Like if Taysom Hill doesn't,
in terms of freeing up cap space, at least right now.
Yeah, but why are you doing that? That's the question. Are you doing that because you're thinking, well, we might now have to trade Alvin and eat some of that cap hit that we were not anticipating? That's to me how it reads is. You are now setting the stage for, well, if this all goes to shit and we have to absorb that hit this year, we can now do that. And we can make it clear to Alvin's camp that that is possible.
Possible. I got you. They definitely don't want to do that, though.
Because they did. No. It's just all. I put that kind of in the negotiating window of like, it's all shrewd decision making and preparation for that sort of thing. But because I saw people like, oh, this is so they can sign a tight end. You didn't need to free up cap space to sign a tight end. They had about $6 million in working cap space. Like
at least the tight ends that are out there right now, for sure.
You're not handing anyone a $6 million contract. You're not handing a UFL player anything but the minimum, right? And you could bring in several minimum players, because in order to do that, you'd have to cut people anyway. So you're really just replacing them on the roster with that guy. That one unguaranteed contract with another unguaranteed contract. Unless you were looking at a guy like Justin Simmons, like one of these bigger name free agents, which I don't think you are at this stage. So I don't know. That's going to be something. But to get more into Alvin, like to stick on Alvin more so than Taysom, when you hear, okay, Alvin's looking for a new contract, what does that kind of read to you? How do you kind of react to that when you hear that news?
It's a little off-putting just for the fact that he's kind of had, I would say, down seasons. I think the last 2 years, but also, you look at it, there's also other factors around it, including the offensive line, the offense called around him. I still consider him one of the better backs in the NFL. But, you look at his deal right now, I think, what is he, the fourth highest paid running back in the league? But I understand he's looking for a little more security right now.
Yeah, he's going to get paid this season, right? He's going to get his money this season. And there's just no commitments beyond that,
right? That
you can say, well, he's in their future plans, and I understand kind of where both sides are coming from, in that, yeah, he has had a couple down years, right? But if I'm Alvin Kamara's camp, I'm like, yeah, well, that you just point at Pete Carmichael and say, all right, send, text Mickey, a picture of Pete Carmichael on the sideline staring at his call sheet, and I think you'll get the idea. That said, you're not going to extend someone on that assumption that, oh, it's all going to be back to what we saw with Drew and Sean because, hey, he's gone and there's a new system. And without seeing how that system kind of works for him and how he works in that system, I mean, how much are you willing to commit? Now, if he goes out and balls out this year, yeah, you extend him off that contract and you're like, sure, fine. Yeah, you proved it. But you can't do that without proving it. And so the question becomes to me, what is Alvin seeking in this? Yeah. Is he just seeking security? Is he seeking an extra year on his deal? Kind of like Tyrann Mathieu, Demario Davis, right? Like they got extended, but you wouldn't say that they made a lot of money in that extension. You just say like they got an extra commitment from the team. So, I mean, to me, I kind of look at it like if Alvin is coming at this saying, I can perform at the level of Christian McCaffrey, so I want a deal like Christian McCaffrey with 2-year, $38 million extension to make you the highest paid running back in the NFL. No, that's a non-starter. Maybe after next year, if you come out and ball out and suddenly it's like, oh yeah, we need this, then yeah. But right now, no, there's no way. There's no way. And so are you looking for something in the range of a Derrick Henry, which is 2 years, $16 million? Because I think if you are, and it's just about that extra year, and you can get away with that extra commitment, I think the Saints do it. But it's going to come down to, I think both sides are going to play hardball because Alvin understands that he has all the leverage in this situation. Because this offense, if you don't have Alvin Kamara in it, it's in trouble.
Yeah, especially when you look at, obviously, too, what's behind him in that running back room. Jamal Williams, Kendra Miller, some of the other younger guys, too, as well. Just, they're not Alvin, obviously.
No. And I mean, that's kind of what you could see. It's one of the helpful things about Alvin not being at OTAs. And he made it clear. One thing Alvin made clear, and I think there was intent behind this, was, okay, the absence from OTA was just me doing my normal thing. And 3 days later, when he leaves camp in pursuit of a new contract for an obvious reason, it's like, that's for that. Me missing OTAs was just me doing my
normal
thing.
Right.
And, he made it clear. Clint made it clear. Neither him or GA would really weigh in on the situation regarding the contract. But they all made it clear that, Alvin has been in contact with Clint. He's been watching the OTA footage. He has access to that on his iPad. He works out 3 times a day in the morning. It's not an issue of him doing the work. So, there is a contract awkwardness on the table, but that wasn't what was building in OTAs. That said, you come back into it and you're like, okay, look at this room around me. You drafted Kendra in the 3rd round last year, but for a few reasons, you should not be necessarily confident he's going to step into that role this year. You saw kind of a glimmer of that in week 18 last year, but nothing that makes you feel like, okay, we can move on from Alvin. This isn't like a Zeke Elliott, Tony Pollard situation in Dallas. No. And you got a chance to watch 3 weeks of OTA practices with NFL caliber running backs running around and doing stuff. And then Alvin shows up and you're like, okay, that's different. That guy is a star, and you don't get very far in the NFL without star players.
Clearly the best piece on that offense. I don't care, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, offensive line. AK's number 1 out there for the offense.
Yeah, and I mean he's had and the reason I'd say hey, we can look at the numbers and say, okay, there's been a drop off. You watch him out there, and it doesn't. You don't get when you watch an older running back running around, you watch David Johnson show up, and you're like, this was once a star. Now he's not that. Right now he is a role player at best. Right. In this scheme. Right, Devontae Freeman was here a few years ago. He was once a star. He's not a star now. You don't get that impression with Alvin. You can still see the way he moves, the contact balance. It's all there. We saw
he's about to hit the dreaded 29-year-old wall right when training camp starts on July 25th there.
Yeah, and that's where, the long-term commitment becomes difficult. But you look at a guy like Christian McCaffrey, who's the same age, essentially, came out of the same draft class, and has had a way heavier workload on him through his time in Carolina, where they basically just ran him into the ground. So, you can look over there and say, hey, I've taken care of my body better than he has in terms of the wear and tear. And one thing you can say about Alvin is he never takes hits. He never takes hits. That's one of the most amazing things about Alvin. You go back through his career. I can't remember a time where, there was a tackle and you're like, ooh, maybe there was one time on a kick return where he got laid out and you're like, we don't want to see that. Right. And you don't see him. People complain that he gets out of bounds instead of taking hits, but that's how you extend your career at the running back position, right? Look at Todd Gurley. Look at all the hits Todd Gurley took early in his career when he was getting run into the ground by the Rams. Where is he now? He's out of the NFL. You can run a running back into the ground, and then that's what the Rams did to Todd Gurley.
Yeah, get used and abused.
Exactly. There's one Adrian Peterson, and we he's the exception to that rule, right?
Yeah.
And even later in his career, you could see that's not the same guy. So I don't know. I don't get that impression with Alvin, and that's why if I'm his camp, I'm like, you're not going to sell me on, well, I'm 29 now, so we're not going to pay you. So I don't know. To me, again, what's the resolution? I think it comes down to how much is Alvin seeking, because if it's within a reasonable range, I don't think you have a huge issue with giving him that extra year. if it's not reasonable, if you're asking for a Christian McCaffrey type number, that's a problem. And so let's hear what Deuce had to say. We had Deuce McAllister on WWL yesterday, and he weighed in on this situation. Here's what he had to say.
End of the day, I think they both have a little leverage. I think that the Saints are probably a little embarrassed that it happened to one of their captains, one of their leaders, as far as this type of situation. But if you do go back and remember, this is not the first time that they've been at odds over a contract. And so you're surprised that it happened in this manner. I don't think that either side is pressed today. Now, if this was August, that would be a little bit different. So I think that, hey, let's see if we can come up with something that makes both of us happy. And, you can bet on yourself and say that I am going to go out and perform at the highest level and prove that I am worth it, but have some security as far as guarantees, like we know that he's going to be able to hit or get. And if he doesn't, then the Saints have a way to get out of it. And, he can go and say, hey, look, it was a short deal. I can go and prove it somewhere else if that should be the case. And so I do think that they figure it out because he is that engine that kind of makes it move, and it is critical. It is critical that they are able to run the football this upcoming season, and we know that they have not been very successful over the last couple of seasons. And so I'm not worried about Alvin missing time. Well, there's no time to miss over the next 4 or 5 weeks anyway, but I'm not truly even worried about him missing, if it's a weekend of training camp. I don't think he would do that because now you're talking about getting fined because you're under contract. And so both teams, I think that they're probably a little bit embarrassed that it got to this point. But at the end of the day, I think that they will figure it out.
Yeah, and I do think, there's probably a little bit of annoyance more so than anything else on the Saints side of things because it's like, why does this have to be like a public conversation? No. But I think there's frustration that it hasn't gotten any further than it has. And so that's why Alvin kind of made that. But he knew what he was doing. It's a calculated move. Right. I mean, he could have just gone to practice. He could have had these conversations behind the scenes and just gone to practice. And he had his agent kind of been like, yeah, we're seeking a new contract. That's going to be a conversation. Leaving and making it a very obvious situation. That's not he's not just doing that. That's a planned move to get this out in the open and make everyone aware of the fact that it's hey, this is not hunky-dory the way that it might be being played out there. And so we'll see. And then, if he misses a weekend at training camp, he's going to have to pay for it. But maybe that's the way you make it, you make it stick, that it's no, this is a thing. CJ Gardner-Johnson had a similar situation, but he did a hold in, right? He just didn't work during training camp, which is kind of
I'm here, but I'm just going to be on the sideline, right?
Yeah, you avoid the fines that way. So we'll see. I mean, the Saints don't end up in this situation often. They're usually pretty good about extending players, right? Or moving on. I think that it's typically not a protracted situation where we're constantly having to answer this question. I think the last real holdout we had was 2019 with Mike Thomas. There was some awkwardness in 2020, but it's tough to say exactly how far that got because it was the COVID season where, there were no OTAs and we weren't really, the access wasn't the same for camp. So it was difficult, but either way, that's going to be the story of the offseason for the Saints. And, I agree with Deuce. If you feel like as a team, you can contend this season and that's your goal, and you feel like I do, that this is a massive kind of make or break season for Dennis Allen. And you need that offense to be kind of that driver that complements the defense for that to be the case. And you can make the argument that, hey, it was kind of this commitment to the old scheme that was holding everything back. Then you need Alvin, and Alvin knows that. So go pay Alvin.
No, and I think we talked about obviously this segment too. It's he showed up during the mandatory mini camp and he sees what's behind them. He's like, yeah, I've pretty much got this solidified. They need me.
They need me. Right. He knows he has leverage here. And so we'll see. But all right, let's wrap up that segment. We're going to come back. We're going to go and do the mini camp takeaways, highlights, guys who stood out, guys who maybe fell flat a little bit, stuff like that. This is Inside Black and Gold. I am Jeff Nowak. He's Steve Geller. Stick around. And we're back on Inside Black and Gold. I'm Jeff Nowak. He's Steve Geller. I just realized, Steve, I don't have your name on here. Let's add it. Oh, I took it away.
Who am I?
I took them all away. All right. There it is. No, we're back. Now we're here. Sorry. People didn't know who you were that whole segment. They were like, "Who's that guy on the left?" All right. I'm talking about
but he's handsome, they were thinking.
You can see I have a new I just realized I can use my iPhone to record these, so I look sharp.
Nice and clear, right?
Yeah. Got that depth of field. It's good stuff.
Nice tan going on.
It's dangerous. I'm starting to get worried. I haven't looked like this since I was a lifeguard. Way back when. But all right, this segment, I want to get into more of the highlights from minicamp, stuff that isn't drama, stuff that isn't Alvin Kamara, stuff like that. I'm going to flash up the highlights package that I put together to over here on the side, and we'll kind of talk around it. And as you can see, if you're watching it, the first thing I'll talk about, Marshon Lattimore shows up. I think he's still working his way into shape a little bit. I think he did the work at home, but I do think that there's a level of work that you have to do outside on a football field to get into football shape that is tough to replicate, particularly for a defensive back. Because, it's something about running around chasing a guy who you don't have any control over what he's doing is something. Either way, Marshon, my first takeaway from Marshon is he looks bought in. I mean, my question going in was, okay, is there drama? Is there awkwardness? Does it seem like there's still some stuff festering there? And, I'll play a clip from Marshon here in a moment, but I didn't get that impression from him. Let's put it that way. I didn't get the impression that, okay, he's here, but he doesn't expect to be here for long. No, I mean, the way he kind of portrayed it, he kind of shut that down. And I think the guy we saw out there, I think he looked like he looked bought in. And so that's a good thing for the Saints.
First day back, and he had an interception.
He did. He also got beat deep over the top by Chris Olave. Sure. I think there were some kind of rust moments. You did see him get beat a couple times, right? And that's kind of, it's funny because last year was the kind of Ohio State grudge match between Mike Thomas and Chris Olave and Marshon Lattimore. This year it's going to be a different Ohio State grudge match in Marshon Lattimore and Chris Olave. But it's still going to be appointment viewing. At some point, Chris needs to take off that red jersey so that people can touch him. But for now, it's fun, and we've seen him get. We've seen both sides win. Marshon took down a pass from Spencer Rattler for an interception. I think he was targeting A.T. Perry. It was a high throw. Marshon made a really nice play on it. I don't know if any other defensive back on the Saints makes that play. If it's Reshjon Wright, even if it's Paulson Adebo, I think A.T. comes down with that ball. Marshon just made a play on it. So we'll see. He also had a pass breakup the other day. They've also been working him in with a few extra reps in with the twos, which I thought was interesting. And I think part of it is, hey, we've got this specific action we want you to try to cover. Maybe you're getting a few extra reps so we can get into game shape. I don't know. But either way, I think from the perspective of one of the biggest questions of this offseason was whether the partnership between the Saints and Marshon Lattimore could continue. I think we got the answer that it can. And it is right now.
Yeah, and the part you talked about too with being bought in, the final day of minicamp, we're at the press conference podium listening to DA, and who comes out of the locker room to do some extra work? It's Marshon putting some extra time in out there. To me, that says a lot too.
Yeah, he didn't have to do that.
Right. He could have took off. Oh, minicamp's over. I'm out of here. Yeah,
get me out of here. This is my 3 days. Now I'm going to have a vacation, right? No, he's out there working, and that's a good sign. And that's always kind of the misunderstood thing about Marshon, I think, is he's quiet, he's reserved, he's in the background, so you don't see it. He's not putting it out on Front Street. Oh, look at this crazy workout I'm doing. Right. So they're like, oh, well, he's just not doing anything. No, he's doing it. That's him. He's a hard worker. He just doesn't care if you see it or not. So either way, and here, let's play a clip from his interview on Tuesday. Another thing that I appreciated, he didn't have to talk to the media this week. He could have gotten away with saying, "I'll talk to you in training camp." First day of minicamp, he's out there. He didn't have to talk for forever. He doesn't like to talk to the media. I get it, but he did it. And so here, let's see a clip from that.
What's kind of the offseason just kind of been like for you with all the chatting, I guess?
I really don't care, to be honest, because it is what it is. If it's going to happen, it's going to happen. If not, then, I'm here. So I really don't get into it. I really don't feed into it, to be honest. I talked to DA already, and we good. So, everything else is just talk to me,
Was it annoying at all?
I don't care. I really don't. I ain't going to lie.
What is your standpoint on it, though? I mean, obviously you guys worked together on a contract that left some options open. Is it something you wanted to explore the idea of?
No, it was just we had a situation, a personal situation that we worked through, but it wasn't like I wanted to leave or he wanted me to leave and nothing like that. It was just, I don't know how y'all looked at it, but it was just a situation that happened, like, you know, personally, but it wasn't nothing like that. Like I wanted to leave. I told him I don't want to leave now.
Do you feel like the air has been cleared between you guys to the point where everything's just, I don't know, livable, I guess?
Yeah, for sure. I ain't got no problem with it. You know, it's all business at the end of the day. Like, I can't have no personal problem because, you know, he want to trade me or something. Like, it is what it is. You know, everybody know they come here and what can happen. You know what I'm saying? I've been hurt for 2 years, so I understand. You know, people probably don't think, you know, I'm the same type of player, whatever the case may be, but all I got to do is prove to people that I am, you know, so that's really falling on me, to be honest.
Was it a situation where you guys did need to kind of have that talk, though, just to get back to being on the same page?
Not for me, you know, but of course, you know, communication is the key for everything, so we talked through it, and, you know, we made a plan for what I'm gonna do this off season and all that, and so that's all we did.
You could take his words with a grain of salt there. I don't really care if you believe him or not. That was his opportunity to either tamp down any idea that there's discontent or throw another log on the fire, right? Like he could have done either of those things. You know, he chose to tamp it down, and it's a good thing for the Saints, right? Because you don't want to have to trade him. Even if you do trade him, you don't want to be in a situation where you have to trade him. I've said that so many times, and it doesn't seem like you do. And you know, it's another situation, kind of like Alvin, where, you know, as much as I love Paulson Adebo, Alontae Taylor, you throw Marshawn out there, and Marshawn is a superstar. You know, like he is that guy, and whether people still believe he is that top 5, top 3, top 2, but not 2 cornerback, he is elite at that position, and you are only better with him on your roster. The idea was
for as critical as the Cajun Cannon's been with him, he's called him the best corner in Saints history.
There's no question. So, you know, if you can move forward with Marshawn, and the only issue is like, well, we got all these people, we got all these players we want to get on the field. How are we going to do it? Like, I'm perfectly happy to try to solve that conundrum separately. So that's a good start. Either way,
we mentioned that first segment too with the Alontae injury already. You just see that cornerback position, you're better off having it stocked than not having enough.
Yeah, I mean, look at what you've had to last year. Like, right. Where did you bet without Ike Adam last year, right? You know, so we'll talk about that. But here, let's flash up the rest of these highlights and go from there. So a few other things that is worth talking about. You know, we mentioned the tight end position. Dallin Holker, you know, he's become a very important piece to this offense if you end up without Juwan Johnson, because, you know, I don't think Foster Moreau had a particularly strong week of practice. Like, if your idea is he can kind of move up and be that kind of all-around tight end, I'm not seeing it. You know, and I think he has a valuable role in this offense, but it's very much as that blocking tight end.
I was going to say, it's not catching the football. A lot of drops I felt like we've seen.
Yeah, I mean, the hands just aren't there. I mean, like he's a good security blanket, but like he's not going to go downfield and make a bunch of tough catches. And so, you know, in the interest of having that, you're looking at, okay, Dallin Holker, Michael Jacobson. One thing DA said is, like, until we get the pads on, we don't really know what you're looking at with these guys. And while Michael Jacobson has kind of made a name for himself in this camp, that guy's tiny. I mean, like, I think Mike Detillier was like, can you imagine if you're a defensive end and you're lined up against that guy, like licking your chops? I'm like, yeah, because he's built like a, you know, like a thin basketball player. You know, you go up and make catches, right? But you're a tight end. Tight ends have to block. You know, and Juwan was kind of in that boat too, where he bulked up. And I was
going to say, yeah, needs to bulk up.
Better about it. He ate some extra pancakes at breakfast, and you added some weight in the trunk there, but. I don't think Jacobson is ready to be much more than, hey, you know, a situational tight end. Either way, Dallin Holker is going to be a guy that I thought he had a good day of catching the ball on Wednesday. We'll find out more when he actually gets in a situation where he can block.
obviously getting used to numbers right now too. I do appreciate the fact he's got the long locks flowing out the back of his helmet.
It does help you identify him out there.
Yes, it does.
All right. You know, we've talked a lot about Hainer and Rattler. I'm not going to dive into it extensively here, but I will say the competition, the backup competition between Spencer and Jake feels a lot closer now than it did going into the week. And part of the reason is, you know, and I talked about this, one of the benefits of being out there for minicamp is you're out there all 3 days. So you get to see who's alternating. And one thing we learned was that Jake and Spencer are alternating. We saw Jake get the second team reps rather on Tuesday. Then Spencer took them on Wednesday. Jake took them on Thursday. And that's what's been happening throughout OTAs as well. So there is more of a competition there than what we have seen in that sense. And, you know, when you kind of see them switch back and forth, you do get to a better appreciation for, okay, when you're working with the threes, you're not necessarily thrown to the better pass catchers in that group. They don't necessarily get open as well. So that doesn't help the eye test when, and then you move up to the twos and you see a little bit more talent. That said, there's a little more talent on defense as well. So you kind of go from there. Like Spencer's interception was against Marshawn. You know, when you're going against Marshawn, you have to throw a ball differently. You have to make decisions differently when you're going against Marshawn. But I thought both guys played pretty well. The difference is I think Hainer kind of stayed consistent. And I think Spencer kind of stepped forward a little bit in terms of you didn't see those throws where you're like, eek. You know, the decisions were more consistent. He seems a little more confident. And so that's a good thing, you know, and you're going to go into training camp and you're going to kind of see it develop.
Yeah, and I think you brought that up previously with Rattler. It's like I just wanted to see one good day for something to build on, and we did get to see that last OTA session, and I felt like that kind of carried over into the mini camp, where there wasn't that plethora of turnovers he was having at the early onset of the OTAs that we got to see.
Yeah, and you know it's more so like you're putting the ball in at risk. You know, like it's like turnovers are kind of, there's an element of randomness to turnovers that makes it's like, oh, he didn't throw an interception. It's like, yeah, but he threw two that could have been intercepted.
Could have been, right.
And so like I think that's the biggest difference is I didn't see so many of those at-risk passes where it's just like, well, it wasn't an interception. That's just because it fell in an area where no one was standing. Like Jake's had at-risk interceptions too. There's just been fewer of them. He threw one actual interception that was to Millard Bradford, because Millard Bradford is the interception guy for this offseason. He's got 3. And that was a tough decision. It was in 7-on-7s. He tried to get it. It reminded me of the interception Derek Carr threw in the opener against the Titans last year at the end of the first half, where it was like his eyes got too big and he saw Juwan Johnson going up the seam and he didn't consider like, well, this is going to get undercut. Like I can't make this throw because there's a safety there kind of waiting. And he threw an interception there. And it was the same kind of situation with Dallin kind of going up the seam. And he just, you know, you think you're a quarterback, I can make that throw. Like you can't make that throw because there's a guy over the top, there's a guy waiting under. So there's no perfect place to put it.
You talk about those at-risk throws, though. I thought the last mini camp session we saw, I still don't know how it was caught. Amazing. Rattler getting one into A.T. Perry. I thought it was a pick for sure.
Yeah, that was a Rezjon Wright, which I think someone told me that his name is pronounced Rezjon. I've been saying Rezjon.
I was saying Rezjon too, so oh well.
Like Rondo, but it's more like Rezjon. Either way, yeah, it's another example of like he had a chance to really make a statement for himself yesterday. Rezjon did, and instead it was like this highlight for A.T. Perry, and so it's like there's a thin margin of good play on defense versus good play on offense because he was in position to make that play. You know, I think what I'll say for Spencer's throw is that it was a bullet.
Yeah,
and I don't know
that in there.
I don't know if Rezjon, who's not a pass catcher by trade, was prepared for the pace on that ball, whereas A.T. Perry, who's a receiver, he got it, you know. But like that thing was rifled in, and if it wasn't, an interception all day. So you know, it's there's a lot that goes into it. But
yeah, you can make the joke. The ball basically caught A.T.
Oh yeah. I'm surprised the ball didn't drive him out of the back of the end zone. Because Spencer's got an arm on him, man. Like that's one thing that you watch him and Derek and Jake throw, and the pace he can put behind the ball is special. Now, that's not everything. Jake Cutler threw the hardest ball I've ever seen. He kind of sucked.
Smoking Jay.
You know, unless he's throwing to Brandon Marshall, right? He go to Vanderbilt. I think he's a Commodore. He's like one of those.
Yeah.
Anyway, but here's a quick clip. Dennis Allen, I asked him about that competition, right? So So let's hear from him just so we can throw to his comments. And that's the space of the competition right now. Spencer with the twos today, is that going to be a situation where they kind of switch back and forth?
Yeah, look, I think, that thing's going to battle out all throughout training camp. And so, and I don't think that position is unique in that I think there's going to be several positions where you'll see a few different lineup changes along the way. And it's just part of the competitive nature of this game that we play and the evaluation process.
Yeah, so like basically what you need to take away from that is it is going to be a competition. We are going to see them continue to alternate, and we're going to go from there. But you're also, he's said so many times at this point, you're not making determinations based off minicamp. You are just collecting information, and that's what you're doing right now. Speaking of collecting information, one guy who was able to put out a lot of information this week to collect because of the absences of Alontae Taylor and Kool-Aid, who I would guess are the top two options at slot right now. Ugo Amadi got a chance to be that kind of first team slot corner. I thought, he's done this throughout OTAs as well. And again, Kool-Aid hasn't been there to kind of take some of those reps. He showed well. And for a guy who has, he has the kind of built-in understanding of the defense, the coaches are familiar with him. They like him. And he's out there making plays, right? Like he had a nice pass breakup on Cedric Wilson in this third day of practice. Seems like every day you get at least one Ugo Amadi play that you're like, all right, there you go. And so like for a guy that I wouldn't say is guaranteed a spot on this roster, I do think that he has a very strong chance to kind of be in that role, kind of like Lonnie Johnson last year. Yeah. I think he's probably competing with like a Will Harris for that kind of veteran safety who can be flexible. But either way, I've been impressed with him.
Yeah, overall, I think we've talked about this in the past, as well as the fact that I just feel like the secondary, the Saints do a fantastic job of scouting there and bringing in talent. They just seem to always have guys that are able to rise up to the challenge in that scenario. And I know Dennis Allen's specialty obviously is DBs.
No question. Just kind of running down here. The other big thing I want to talk about, and then we'll have a couple quick notes. Derek Carr has been very solid. Right. Like I think he's run this offense well. You're kind of working into it. I talked to Clint. I asked Clint about, all the motion and everything. I think it's like, I think part of what's going on right now is you're just throwing everything at everyone really quickly and seeing how much they pick up. And so that's why you're seeing motion on almost every snap. You're seeing a lot of different types of motion. You're seeing drills where they're trying to throw with anticipation and like throw people out of breaks, which I haven't seen in the past. You're seeing a lot of red zone work, this seems to be earlier than I remember seeing this much red zone work. You're seeing a lot of situational stuff. And what I was happy to see over the last 2 days of practice, right? You're dealing with late 2-minute situations where you're down more than a field goal and you need to drive for a touchdown. And we saw that happen back-to-back weeks last year. Texans, Jaguars, Saints failed both times. They made a drive, they drove downfield, they gave themselves a chance, but they couldn't finish it off. And that kind of built into the red zone issues, a lot of the problems you were having finishing off drives. Saw a stat from Warren Sharp that he put out, like total plays in the red zone last year. The Saints were like 6th in the NFL in terms of total plays in the red zone last year. They moved the ball. They got downfield. They didn't finish it off. Well, the last 2 days of practice, you were put in situations where, the quarterback needed to drive the team downfield and get into the end zone for a touchdown. And both times, they were extended drives. You took advantage of a lot of different pass catchers. On Wednesday, it was Taysom Hill. You threw to Taysom Hill 3 times in a row. You got a screen to Alvin Kamara. You managed to isolate Alvin on Carl Granderson in coverage, and he was either an out and up or a wheel. I don't have footage to go back and tell you what exactly the route was. But you get it to Alvin up the sideline for a touchdown. Then he hits Rashid Shaheed for the 2-point conversion, so you're up 3. It's not a game. It's going to be different in a game. But you're kidding yourself if you don't think this defense takes a lot of pride in not looking bad in those situations too. And then the next day you saw a similar situation, right? I think they were down 5, maybe 6, but you get the ball to Cedric Wilson, Jamal Williams a couple times, and then you end up hitting Chris Olave on kind of a do or die play at the back of the end zone covered by Marshawn Lattimore. Would have been a touchdown in that environment. And again, like those are the types of drives that make you money as a quarterback. And while, again, this is practice, it's not a game. This Saints have a good defense. Saints defense is one that is difficult to practice against. So it's good to see that kind of understanding in this new offense. If those drives had bogged down and just not gone anywhere, that would be concerning, right? But then you would say, like, okay, it's a new offense and he's picking it up. The fact that we don't have to say that is nice. So I was happy to see that. And I've been, we haven't talked a ton about Derek Carr, but it's not because he hasn't looked good. It's because he's been consistent, and that's what you need to see. So I've been happy with what I've seen from Derek Carr so far. Yeah,
and I think, too, it's like you don't want to overhype things, obviously, because no pads right now. We're still just in the mandatory and voluntary workouts that we were seeing. Things will definitely ramp up some more come training camp time. But, yeah, you're right. He's been consistent, on point, looks solid out there. I've been impressed just the fact that looks at ease, at least right now, in this offense with Clint Kubiak. And that was something I was concerned about, I guess, is how long would it take to adapt to a new scheme. And I thought that was kind of like a built-in excuse that this offense would have this year if things didn't work out right away.
I agree. A couple other notes. Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, I don't think they're getting as much respect around the NFL as maybe they deserve, as kind of a top-end wide receiver duo. And I understand why. I mean, there's just not household names, at least not Rashid at this point. But I do think that in this offense, they have a chance to be special and threaten in ways that you might not be able to in the past, right? Because both of those guys, while they aren't that contested catch elite X receiver that you might have thought of like Mike Thomas, right? Or even a Marcus Colson, they are guys who can take the top off the defense at any point. They remind me a lot more of the Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill duo than some of the traditional Saints duos. And
that's fair, right?
That's not a bad thing, because this is a offense that is going to operate similarly to what the Dolphins do. That's why you brought in Cedric Wilson, right? And so I think that in this scheme, their skill sets work. And we're going to see that kind of develop over time. And it's going to be on Derek to get them the ball where they can run with it. Because that's what the Dolphins do really well, is they not only get the ball to their playmakers, they get the ball to them in space, and they allow Tyreek Hill to catch and run. They allow Jalen Waddle to catch and run. And that's kind of what we've seen. I've written down at least 3 times. Like I read the same note about Rashid almost every practice. Like, this dude is so fast. He's just so fast. Like, you get him the ball, it's like no one's catching that guy if you get him the ball and let him run. And that's what I want to see more of. It was what annoyed me about, it's like we had Deontay Hardy. He never got on the ball in the middle of the field. It was just something that the Sean Payton offense didn't do as well as some of the other offenses out there. Is kind of, it was a lot of stick routes. It was a lot of, okay, you catch and you go down. So I think, like, by the end of this season, around the league, you'll be having a much different conversation about the Saints wide receiver room. I don't know if that's going to put them over the top in terms of win-loss, in terms of making it back to the playoffs, but you're not going to lose this season because the wide receiver room is not up to snuff, at least on those top 2 guys. Behind them, there's a question. But from what we've seen so far, I'm excited about what these 2 guys can do this year.
Yeah, and I think for that point, too, I guess folks are got to be concerned. Obviously, injury happens to Olave or Shaheed, and then all of a sudden things don't look so hot. Because you meant, you mentioned, behind them, there's just a whole lot of question marks.
I agree with that. All right, continuing on, a couple other things. Blake Rupe looks very solid. I mean, like, you can say, hey, there's going to be a kicker competition. I had talked to Darren Rizzi about it. He expects kind of a second-year jump for both him and Lou Hedley. I think that's what we've seen, right? Like, we've seen 2 guys who not only have come into camp as kind of the presumptive starter, they've come into camp and look very, very confident. They look like starting NFL specialists. Blake hasn't missed a kick. And not only has he not missed a kick, I mean, these are all like straight down the middle. Like there's always a camera, like a pole behind the goalpost, and it's like splitting, like bisecting the goalpost. And it's always funny to see, like, okay, are they going to hit it? And I mean, I don't know if Blake's hit it, but it's like every kick is within like 3 feet of that pole. And I just mean, that's what you want out of a kicker. You want consistency. Like, yeah, it's nice if you have look a Blake Maher or a Brett Maher. He's a guy who could probably kick a 70-yard field goal in a game. but he's also a guy that can miss 4 consecutive extra points in a game, right? And there's a middle ground there, and you don't want to be on the wrong side of it. And so, like Charlie might be able to make a 66-yard kick in practice. I think we saw him do that the other day. And I don't know if Blake has that kind of leg, but I would rather have a guy who's going to make 55-yard kicks 8 out of 10 times than a guy who's going to make that 5 out of 10 times, but can also make a 60-yard kick 3 out of 10 times. Because here's the thing, those long field goals, you might end up in that situation twice a year where you don't mind if you miss because it's like an end of game scenario or an end of half scenario. In most situations, you are not settling for a 60-yard field goal because if you miss, it's basically a turnover at midfield. So, you're not going to give that guy that opportunity more so than like desperation. And you're not picking your kicker based on, well, he can make a 66-yard field goal. So for that, like I went in saying I don't see much of a kicker competition, and nothing I saw there during minicamp changed that.
I think I was standing next to you talking about this when Charlie Smith, the Irishman's kicking. It's kind of, you're leaning, going, is it going to be good? Is it going to make it through?
Yeah, a lot of body English going on when he's kicking.
Yeah,
no question. The other guy, Willie Gay, been impressive. I thought P. Warner's also been impressive. I think this linebacker room is going to be a strength of this group. Willie Gay's athleticism is elite at the linebacker level, and I am interested to see. I asked Joe Woods kind of how that affects your, does that give you a lot more flexibility? And he said, of course it does. Yes. I think it's the Ruby package where you're getting more linebackers on the field, and you're going to be able to use that a lot more because Zach Bond, you could only really get him on the field. You can only really use your base personnel when it was a obvious rundown, and not in terms of him not being a pass rusher. And I just think with Willie Gay, you're going to be a little more flexible. He's also got a diamond right here, which I just, I don't know. I just thought that was funny. He was talking, and you don't see it all the time, but when he smiles, he's got like, it's like eye tooth. He's got a diamond in it, which I don't know. Those guys have veneers anyway. So it's like, it's probably expensive.
Hey man, when you're a Super Bowl champ, you shine.
Did you see the Chiefs Super Bowl rings? I bet he's got one of those. There's a typo on it.
No, I didn't see that part.
Yeah, they had the Dolphins listed as a 7 seed instead of the 8 seed. Or the 6 seed. I don't remember.
At least it's not that extreme for it. It's nothing,
just funny.
Yeah.
Like how expensive, how much these rings cost?
Right.
Typo on.
They look amazing, right?
They do. They look amazing. All right. Let's wrap up that segment. Again, this is Inside Black and Gold. I'm Jeff Nowak. He's Steve Geller. If you've gotten to this point and you haven't subscribed yet, I don't know what to tell you.
Do it.
Yeah, it's actually crazy that you have gotten to the 50-something minute mark of this podcast and not subscribed to it. Because what else are you doing? What's the point? Anyway, but we'll be right back. Talk about our biggest questions remaining going as we look ahead to minicamp. Who dat? We'll be right back. And we're back. One more segment here on Inside Black and Gold. I'm Jeff Nowak. He is Steve Geller. We just spent 3 days out at Saints minicamp, the mandatory one. Some drama. We went through it all. But now we're going to talk about questions. We're going to look ahead a little bit. And so, Steve, is there any big questions looming for you as we kind of hit this break here that you see going into training camp, going out to Irvine in a month?
I'll take the easy layup answer here just because obviously we haven't seen anything with pads. It's just the offensive and defensive line, how things going to shake out along the offensive line. There's obviously a lot of changes there this year. How's Trevor Penning going to look now playing right tackle? The rookie in Fuaga, how's he going to look at a left tackle position that he hasn't really played much of, but was, primarily right tackle at Oregon State? And then the guard position as well. Is Sal DeVeri going to be that guy for you, or is it one of these other veteran type presences that you have there? We just don't know many answers right now without the pads on. I think it is pretty clear, though. It doesn't really, sadly, seem that Ryan Ramczyk is going to be in the picture anytime soon.
No, they're going to continue to say, "Oh, we'll find out." Man, don't bank on it. If he shows up and there's some kind of like miraculous recovery, great. We'll talk about it then. Until then, you're going to assume that he is not there. But yeah, that's one of my big questions too, particularly in the offensive line, is how does that group shape up? Where are they right now? And one of the reasons that I think it's kind of funny because I don't necessarily have a clear answer on that because I kept, Marshall Newhouse would talk to Minicamp, former offensive lineman.
Yeah.
And he talked about Fuaga, and, this scheme, it seems, is if you ever had to go into a season with a lot of questions and young players on your offensive line, this system is helpful in that, because you're only asking them to pass protect a handful of like just straight up pass protect a handful of times a game, because so much of this scheme is built on getting them out in space, getting the run game going, getting the play action game going, and if you do that correctly, the pass protection really isn't a huge factor. And that was kind of, we kind of saw that play out because there were several reps that I was like, all right, I'm going to watch Trevor Penning and just watch his footwork and watch this. And it's like almost always without fail when I made that decision on a particular rep, it was a rep where there was nothing to watch, or at least not in a pass protection sense, because he's constantly getting out in space, and that's where he thrives. He is an athlete. It drives me nuts when people tell me he's not athletic enough at left tackle. That's his greatest asset, is his athleticism. And that's what I would say about Nick Saldiveri too, is he's a very athletic guy. Fuanga is a very athletic guy too. And so I'm interested to see how that goes, because are you going to value the athleticism at that position over maybe a veteran presence at that position? Last year, you didn't. Last year, you were like, okay, we're going to go with Pete, we're going to go with Hurst, and we're going to make it work because I trust those guys, and I know they can do what I need them to do. They might not be able to do it at the top level. They might not be a guy with a high ceiling right now, but I at least know what to expect from them from week to week. I think that's going to be different this year, because I think you're going to value that athleticism at a higher level than maybe you did in the past. And that's what we've seen. And so for that reason alone, it's tough, because I haven't, again, they haven't been in pads. You haven't really seen them necessarily drop back and have those pass sets. But I do think that, from that perspective, I think Marshall's right on there in, the concern about the young players. From a scheme perspective, you should be able to protect them a lot more easily than you were able to last year.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm just hoping that the new scheme, the new grouping can adapt quickly enough, for week one. Obviously, you don't want to have this things being a mess and unanswered going into a matchup against the Panthers. You end up dropping a game there. It just it'll be interesting. Like, the training camp work is going to be so important, just because we haven't seen anything obviously in pads right now. Everything looks hunky-dory at this point, so it's hard to really gauge.
Yeah, and so that kind of leads into my next question was, all this motion, all of these shifts, a lot of this kind of unique stuff that they're doing right now. How prevalent will that be going forward? Are you seeing more of it now because you're really trying to hammer it home so that when you do go to it in a game, it's not like, oh, you're trying to think about it in real time, you're just reacting? Or is this really what we're going to see? Because we have been seeing motion on basically every snap.
Right.
Like, the only time we didn't see a ton of motion in this last practice was the 2-minute drill, where you're just kind of, going at the line, you're making calls to the line. I don't know. I asked Clint Kubiak kind of about that, and this is what he had to say.
Yeah, I think we put our guys, we gave a lot to them. Definitely way more than we'd ever put in one game plan, and they handled it really well. So you just got to put them through it. You got to make it hard on them in practice, make them study at night, and I think overall I was pleased with the detail our guys had and our coaches that put them through it.
Yeah, and I think what he's saying there is like, okay, you're loading people up with everything right now and seeing what gets picked up. Now, I think they're going to motion a lot. The question is, do you do it as much as, say, the Dolphins, who basically motion on every snap, or does it become something that you go to at points? Either way, like, it's, when people start to see this offense in games, like when we get to the preseason, like, I don't know if fans are going to be able to get out there to watch them in practice. It's going to look very, very different when you see it for the first time. And it's just going to be constant people moving around. When guys said here, the tight end said here, guys. And it's going to be a question of, okay, do they, because one thing that I can guarantee you will piss off Dennis Allen real fast is all of these shifts leading to a ton of procedural penalties.
Right.
So if you are going to shift that much, you got to do it correctly. And so I think like that's part of the reason you're doing it a lot more right now than maybe you will, but that's going to be something we have to see.
No, yeah, like I said, the whole digesting of his offense and seeing what is able to come forth is still a question mark, obviously, and definitely looking forward. What we got, like 3-4 weeks until training camp starts in Irvine.
Yeah, one of my other questions is, what do you do about the running back depth? Because while I think you do need to go sign Alvin Kamara, you also need to start preparing for the scenario where he's not here next year. And so who's that? What do you do there? I don't know what to expect out of Kendre Miller. Right. Like, is he going to be able to stay healthy? I know that ankle has been a problem for him. Will it continue to be a problem for him? We'll find out. Jordan Mims has looked solid, but you feel good about him as a depth guy.
Sure.
You don't feel good about him if you're like, okay, yeah, let's rely on Jordan Mims for a significant amount of time. Like Tony Jones was one of the more productive running backs last year. Jamal Williams, hopefully you can get him a more representative season than you did a year ago, but can you bank on that? I don't know. So all that is to say, I expect you'll start working out running backs, veteran running backs who might be out there on the market, and potentially bringing a guy or two in. I don't have a list right now of guys who that might be. It's something we'll figure out in the next few weeks. But I think you're going to add to that running back room one way or another.
I did like a quick browse the other day, and I was like, someone like Dalvin Cook's out there, but I don't know how much that dude has left.
Dalvin Cook is a free agent, yeah. But no, yeah, like names like that, guys who have done it before, and you can have a little faith in. But we'll see. But yeah, that's my question. Anything else, Steve?
We've mentioned a little bit, obviously, how things are going to shake out with the wide receiver depth too. Just a lot of guys that have made a little noise these mandatory and voluntary sessions. Really interested in a Yaley, Mason Tipton. I've been impressed with. Seem to write down a note or two about him every single session. So I don't know if that can continue on, but also a Cedric Wilson Jr. I thought come these mandatory mini camps really made his presence known as well.
Yeah, what I'll say about the wide receivers is I think the pieces are in the building.
Yes.
Like, I don't think you're going to add a bunch of wide receiver pieces. I do think you're going to add a tight end or two.
I know the big question. I'm glad you said that. Everyone wants to go, what about Hunter Renfrow? What about him? I don't really think he's in the plans.
Yeah, I mean, I think if he was in the plans, you would have brought him in by now. But we'll
right,
see.
And it could still happen with camp obviously not kicking off yet. But it doesn't feel like that's right at the moment. Yeah,
it might be a situation where you're waiting to put some guys on the PUP list. And once you do that, then you can bring a few new pieces in because you don't want to make any cuts, but we'll find out. My final question is, how long does this kind of feel-good, hunky-dory mood last? Because there is one right now. We did see our first fight of training camp. Lucas Patrick and Trajan Jeffcoat kind of got into it. There was some chirping back and forth between the offense and the defense. But it does kind of feel like there's this kind of mood of like, yeah, everything's good. Everything's good. We kind of saw that start to crack a little bit with Alvin, but okay, how long before the stress creeps in of like, there's a lot of pressure on a lot of people to deliver this year, and will that continue? I don't know. Like, DA has done a good job of portraying that picture in the right way. Like, I think he's done a good job of speaking to the media, not like even like the Alvin situation, the Marshawn situation. Like, those are difficult things to talk about for a coach because you don't want to say things that are going to get perceived the wrong way. You don't want to undercut you don't want to be perceived as throwing your team under the bus or your players under the bus, but you also want to like command that situation. You don't want to come off sounding weak. So it's tough. I think he's managed it pretty well to this point. As you go forward with Alvin, that's another question, but he doesn't have to talk to the media for a while. So
to me, I think things are going to get like real when you get to do those joint workouts with the 49ers, because obviously they're a huge measuring stick and you can really see where I think stand going up against a team like that in practice.
Yeah, and I think the new offense is going to help kind of sustain some things here. I think the level of frustration last year, early in the year, was palpable in part because everyone kind of felt like this offense is not working, and we don't really have a lot of changes. We don't have a lot of levers to pull to make it work because it's so entrenched in what it does. And even the changes that were made seemed short-lived. Like, it's like, oh, we shifted this week. You happy? Okay, let's go back to not doing it. You know, like,
yeah, the creativity just seemed to be absent.
Right. It was a lot of like reactionary stuff. Like, oh, well, okay, we haven't done enough play action. Let's do some extra play action this week. All right. Okay. Hey, what? Okay, cool. Let's move on. Let's do something. Anyway, like, you weren't building, you weren't running offense. You were just reacting to like, you were just kind of plugging holes and in ways that were not permanent. And so we'll see. But I like what I've seen from the offense. I think the defense is going to be consistent.
Right. Agreed.
So we'll see. But for now, that's it. That's what I got.
Does the podcast get a break until training camp too?
No.
Oh,
sorry. We will have some much less direct topics. I do want to do a roster projection, updated roster projection. We'll probably get to that next week. You know, we could talk about some of the options to bring in for running back, for tight end. I assume we'll see a name or two crop up in the next week or so, particularly at the tight end position. But there's really no incentive. There's no need to do it quickly because you have all that time before, you got about 6 weeks before anyone has to be out in Irvine. And we'll see. But
yeah, curious to see. Obviously, we know Juwan having surgery. How long is that process going to take for the recovery? I'm hoping it's nothing serious. It doesn't seem that way, but that's easy to say for a guy not going under the knife.
Yeah, I mean, it's always going to be, okay, is he back for camp? How much of camp is he missing? That sort of thing. We'll have to have that same conversation with about Chase Young. Maybe about some other players.
All right, he's healed from the surgery, then how long to get back into football shape, that whole process.
Yeah, are there any other players that have to have surgery in the interim, right? Yeah. Stuff like that. That always seems to crop up, and we'll see if it does this year. But that's it. That's the end of the episode. We'll be back next week. We'll have a lot more. I apologize. This is like a posting on a Friday. It's a terrible day to post a podcast. But, hey, hope everyone that needs it gets it.
And if you can't get enough of it, we'll be on Sports Talk Friday, 4 to 7 as well.
Hopefully this episode gets to you prior to that actually happening. We'll see. Right. But all right. Who dat? Go Saints. Be easy, y'all.
See you soon, Who Dats.